fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons. Like diamonds. We are back again talking about bridge fishing. Talk about some tips, some tactics, a little cool underwater story that I'm going to share with you to kind of kick this podcast off. And it'll also talk about the biggest mistakes. There are so many mistakes, and I watched it happen just this past week. Just got back from the Keys. We do a little family trip every year and do some lobster diving. And if you guys don't know, down in the Keys, really at any of the bridges, it's a great place to catch lobster. It can be very tough because you have fishermen, which I'm going to kind of share the story of what I got to see firsthand underwater. And you're kind of diving through some fishing lines sometimes. And also you got current and you got sharks and all kinds of stuff because of the ecosystem down there. And so it was very eye-opening. And I wish I could just yell out at some of these fishermen. One, to be a little bit more respectful. When you see divers, you don't go drop a lead down. But two, hey, you're fishing in the complete wrong area. And so we got a crew here. If you're listening in, let's see, we got Wyatt, Justin, Austin, and Richard. Luke is actually still down there as I'm recording this, down in the Keys, doing a couple more dives just to maximize the amount of lobster that he brings home for us to feast on. So, guys, welcome to the show.
What's going on, Joe?
Just excited to be here. So let me zoom in for you guys listening. Just imagine that I'm looking at a Google satellite image, which I am, and I'm in Isla Mirada, Florida. I'll zoom out to kind of give you an idea here of where we be. So I'm going to zoom in here. In this particular bridge, we dove Channel 2, Channel 5. The next one's Long Key Bridge. All of those we did quite a bit of diving on. And this one in particular is where I saw the most fishermen while we were diving. And obviously, if we get there, we're looking for areas that don't have fishermen on the bridge and obviously avoid them. Like I said, there's a couple of times where we're clearly like anchored underneath them and guys will literally just drop right next to you, which I thought was kind of rude, but it happens. So right here, on the bridge, hopefully you guys can see it. That's the little pier. It's right off. So you park over here, which is public parking, right here, and you walk. This whole area here is kind of a fishing pier, and they have the same thing up here on the south side, really west side, but south if you're looking at going south in the Keys. And then out here, can you guys see this where my little arrow is? This is they basically look like just big towers, and they're big structures for cables. So they have all the electricity cables going along here, and these are massive towers, like 60, I don't know, maybe 80 feet tall, and it's a really big piece of structure. And so we like to dive both these little tower structures and the actual bridge. But what was interesting, so let's just say I'm over here on this one. It was one of these. And it was one of these, and I'm watching all these fishermen over here, and they're casting out as far as humanly possible in this area. So instead of dropping right down below them, they're casting out, like they're hurling these things out here. Now, here's what's interesting. Peter Deeks always talks about it. He's like, you can learn so much. Probably the best education you can ever get as an angler is to put a mask and snorkel and fins on and go underwater and see where the fish are, see what they're attracted to, see how they're positioned. And so this was crazy. And so I was here for 3.5 hours. So I got to see, it wasn't just like one part of the tide cycle. We got to see quite a bit of it. And in 100% of the cases, there was not a single fish from here to here. Not one. Like literally, it was a ghost town. There was one little area, I won't share it because there was one little piece of structure, but that had a few fish. But besides that, there was literally zero, as in like not a single fish to be found from this piece of structure to this piece of structure. And if you guys are listening, I'm talking about these big towers to the actual bridge. Now, as soon as you hit this shadow line and as soon as you hit the bridge, boom, it was like all of a sudden life opened up. I mean, you saw tarpon, you saw tons of snapper, you saw gag grouper, you saw Goliath grouper, you saw even some hogfish in some of these little holes. There's all kinds of cool stuff. It was amazing. And I'm watching these fishermen who were like literally not dropping down. The ones who were catching fish were just dropping straight down. And these other knuckleheads were casting as far as they could, thinking, I don't know what they were thinking, but they couldn't cast far enough to hit these towers where there were some fish because there's structure there. And they were missing all this. And so, as I mentioned a couple of times, people are dropping right next to us. This is tip number one, is to maximize the structure. And if you're fishing a bridge, I mean, and obviously every bridge is different. You have jetties and stuff that could be considered similar. So you're going to have different situations. But all three of these bridges, the same thing held true, where all of the fish were within, I'd say, 2 feet, maybe 3 max from the actual structure. They did not move off. They weren't out clowning around. They weren't playing tag with their friends. They weren't out there going back and forth. This was literally a ghost town the entire 3.5 hours that we were diving back and forth in this entire area. So that is tip number one. Tip number two is, it was really interesting as we saw some knuckleheads drop lines right near us. I mean, you could see, their thick monolines, and I could see their hardware and their big weights. And I watched these fish, especially some tarpon, they were going up and they were checking this out. Like, not once did I see a fish just see something drop down and go attack it and all of a sudden be hooked up. Like, these fish were like nosing it. They were checking it out. They'd run away from it. Like, it was an incredibly slow and like painful process. I thought maybe it was just because I was there, but they were doing this time and time again. And I thought that was very interesting. So tip number two there would be to minimize your hardware and try to have like the lowest test line you possibly could, because it was fascinating, especially the tarpon. I mean, they were certainly curious. It was almost like they saw a hook or they saw something, and they would go up next to it and almost kind of nose it, and then they would turn around and say, adios, I'm out of here. Really, really, really wild. But the number one thing I wanted to share with this, because it just happened, was if you're fishing a bridge like this, for instance, just be as close as humanly possible to the structure. If there's no structure, there was no fish. I mean, zero. It was an absolute desolate ghost town. And anytime there was some structure, like these pilings here on the towers or the actual bridge structure, there was tons of fish, like tons of life. So I love Justin, Wyatt, any of you guys chime in on some other thoughts about this, or if you want me to go zoom in on some other bridges. I wanted to kind of start with that story just because it's so fresh, and I watched it happen this past week.
Yeah. Justin, you beat me to it. You're on it first.
Well, so I've fished the bridges down in the Keys before, man, and it's a unique fishery. There's so many bridges. There's a lot of water, and listening to you talk about just observing the fish, because you weren't down there to fish. I mean, you were down there to get some bugs, get some lobsters. So you had some time to just keep your eyes on and see the behavior of these fish and what they were doing. And it's very much a 90-10 when you're bridge fishing. There's so much space out there that you said is desolate. And down in the Keys, that water is honking, especially with this big moon phase you had. Currents moving pretty quick. Whether I fished in Jacksonville, which I want to hear from Richard and Austin, because I remember fishing up in Nassau Sound and Clapboard Creek Bridge and stuff up there, or fishing down here, there, and Long Key Bridge a little bit south of where you were, Joe. You've got these pilings, and people don't fully take advantage of it and understand that right below you, where that center concrete piling is direct, depending on what direction the current is coming, is going to create this eddy, this little wash where there isn't that intense current, and all of these fish are going to wait in ambush behind those pilings. Depending on incoming or outgoing tide, you're right, dropping straight down is the primo place that you want to have your bait. And I would do that for big redfish up in Jacksonville in years past, all the big jacks, and even a couple tarpon and some permit. I was able to sight fish permit from the bridges down there right behind the backside of those pilings, regardless of what the tide was doing, as long as I was in an area where there was an eddy and next to structure, really tight to structure. Where you pointed out on those bridges, you've got a section where people can come out onto the fishing pier, and then you have the actual driving bridge, and there's that gap in between the two. So if you zoom in a little bit, you were pointing out those towers. You're right. I guess they're like cell towers or electric towers or something. Yep. But from the actual bridge that people are on, It looks like it said something Heritage Trail to the Overseas Highway, US 1. The space between the two is kind of like a ping pong table as well. So all that area out in the open between the fishing bridge and those pilings or towers out there was barren, but that little gap area between the actual fishing bridge and the driving bridge, as long as the tide is right, I would assume it on an outgoing tide where it's coming from top to bottom, that water flow is excellent. Those fish zigzag between that short little area, between those shadow lines, and a lot of tarpon and permit will just kind of cruise back and forth. And they might not be super oriented to structure, but they're going to be in that zone because they have different structure and a short distance between each other to bounce back and forth from. It's really cool. The Keys is such a cool place to fish, and it's so accessible for anybody, vacationers, people that have saltwater before. It's a great place. It has a lot of fish, but you're 100% right. It's about your strategy, and it's about how you dissect the area that you're going to fish and maximize your efforts in that period of time you're going to fish there.
Yep. And yeah, it's funny because, divers, we're free diving, no tanks or anything. And we use the same tactic you mentioned when the current is ripping. Obviously, you want to maximize your time during slack time when you're diving bridges like this, but it's impossible. There's just not enough bugs and time to like have one little hole. It's not like the Bahamas where you can find one big rock and see 50 keeper lobster. And so you're always going to be down there during times where there's some pretty legit current flow. And we use those pilings just like the fish do. And so you're literally there, like getting your breath and hiding behind this piling while the current's just ripping by you. And you're seeing like keeper, snapper, and grouper, and even some Goliath grouper, which can be a little bit intimidating when you see a 300-pounder right below you. And they're literally, we're all sharing the same little area there, trying to essentially, not get swept away. And for these fish, obviously they're waiting for crustaceans and little small bait to come right into their mouth. But, Peter Deeks did the same thing. We had, the whole underwater bait forensics, and now he's working on an underwater, like inshore fishing forensics as well. He's been working on that for 8 or 9 months. And on clear days, even in Fort Pierce, and they've gone down in Sebastian, right, which look and feel a whole lot different than the Keys. And the same thing holds true. I mean, Deeks talked about it in the one tip. He's like, if you don't have your bait within 2 to 3 feet of the structure of like a bridge piling, you are missing out on almost all the fish, on 90% of the fish. They're all hugging as close as possible to that structure. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways. And like I said, I just watch these guys chunk this stuff out there and let it sit for an hour. And we'd literally be cruising by and we could see their baits just sitting there. And there's nothing even remotely nearby out here in no man's land. So that's like the number one takeaway is if you're fishing a bridge, fish as tight to the structure as humanly possible, regardless if you're fishing on top of the bridge or even if you're in a boat. The same thing applies, right? You want to be as absolutely humanly close as possible to those pilings or whatever you might know that is down there. Because we did see some people who had purposely left some interesting things underwater to entice lobster to go underneath them. Which is not legal, by the way, so don't do that. Who's next?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit because I was just doing some bridge fishing over in Pensacola with some of our members of the Insider Club. And it was the exact same story. There weren't a whole lot of fish that were off of the bridge. All of the activity was centered near the pilings. And if you've got a bottom reader and you're going over these areas, the pilings were extremely consistent, but we did find some structure that was under the bridge itself. I guess there was a hurricane and that had destroyed some of the bridge, and some of the rubble from the bridge had been displaced underneath the actual structure itself. It was close to pilings. And that was where there was a lot of congregation of fish. We got on to snapper and trout. It was just a really big congregation of activity there. It seemed like you could look on that bottom feeder and see all these fish on top of the structure to the sides of it. But it was the same thing with the pilings as well. And, bouncing jigs down there, putting live shrimp down. It didn't matter what we put down there just because those fish are going to stick close to structure. When it comes to bridges, it's just usually a lot of open water around it. There's not a whole lot they can bounce between. Justin did give the good example of the fishing bridge in close relation to the larger pilings on that bridge. If there's there's another big piece of mega structure nearby, I will see fish kind of bounce between those two. But it seems like if you've got a bridge that's over an open bay or it's connecting to, large islands, it's usually in an open channel. And fish will just, if that's the one piece of structure that they can hang by, they're going to stay there pretty much the whole time. So just focusing on your presentations near that structure or structure you can see on your bottom reader that's actually close to the bridge. I wouldn't say structure that's too far off, but any structure that's under the bridge itself or just the pilings, that's where you're going to get the most activity.
Yep, love it. And with a lot of these bridges, they've been around for a long time, regardless if you're in Florida, Texas, Carolinas, doesn't really matter. And there's been bridges that have been replaced completely. There's been a lot of times where they'll keep the old bridge and they'll tear down part of it and leave part for like a fishing pier, right? And in every one of those cases, there was a tear down and then there was a rebuild. And it's just like any kind of contractor for roofing or anything, stuff drops, it slips. And it's very evident when you're down there diving and seeing what's down there. And there's massive blocks of concrete, which is structure, and that holds all kinds of shrimp and lobster and then all the fish around that. So if you can do any kind of due diligence about where existing bridges used to be, if there was one nearby or where they were doing construction, you will be blown away at the stuff that is left by these contractors, whoever's building these things. Because think about it, if they drop a big old piece of concrete or even just a cinder block, they're not going back down there and diving to retrieve it. They're just like, it's underwater, it'll create a reef. And in many cases, probably it's encouraged in some areas. So just know that there's all kinds of stuff down there, and usually it's right underneath the bridge or a couple feet from it. It's usually not out 50 or 60 feet. And so I think the kind of the theme you're hearing is you don't have to have an 8-foot rod or even a 12-foot rod like your surf rod to cast out a mile. Rarely are you going to see fish, a lot of fish activity out there. But maybe there's some cases. What do you guys think? Are there some cases where you fished a bridge where you got to completely launch it away to really get a bite? And I'm not talking about like a jetty. I'm talking about like a legit bridge.
I wouldn't say so, because most of the time a bridge is going to go from one piece of land to the next. And in a perfect world, I guess, the center of that bridge is typically going to be where your channel's at. So more than anything, you would work that water column, go deeper towards the channel before you would, cast way out. Now, you might have a hole out there. You might have a rock pile out there. And if you're casting towards something like that, that definitely could hold fish. But let's say that's not there and you are not aware of anything that's out there. For the most part, it's best if you just keep your bait right there at that structure, because bridges are like literally an inshore reef. It holds crabs and bait fish all year round, from shells to attract sheepshead, redfish, black drum. You'll get all your fish that are coming past that bridge have to come past that bridge. And if there's bait there, likely they're going to feed there. But yeah, for the most part, keep your bait close to those pylons. If there's something else going on out there, odds are you're going to see it. Like whether it's tarpon that are coming through, you're going to see them surfacing. Or if there's bait that's coming through and it starts getting blowed up on, then okay, yeah, there's some fish out there. I can make this cast. But for the most part, you're going to keep your bait right there at that bridge.
Cool. What you got, Richard?
Yeah, and kind of going back off of Justin's point, bridges, these are typically high current areas. They're a lot of times between two larger bodies of water, and a lot of times even kind of a funnel. There typically is some really good current flow there. And a couple good things with that, a lot of times your bigger fish will be in some of these areas because they can take it, So, going back to what Austin said as well, those current breaks and those eddies are going to be really where you want to target. And personally, up here, we have such huge tides over here on the East Coast. I really like targeting, bridges during the top and bottom thirds of the tide, because if not, it's almost it's a washout. There's so much water rushing through there. It's really even difficult for the fish. I'm sure as you experienced even down where you were, Joe, it's just hard to stay in that current for any extended period of time.
Yeah, that's when you get back in the boat and have a lunch break.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're diving. Cool.
That's what's cool about it too.
Yeah,
you can find bridges that are all over too, though. If you're fishing a bridge that's closer towards the inlet, you might be more available to one certain species, and then you go further back. There might be another, like just for an example there, like here in Jacksonville, the St. Johns River is huge. So if I'm fishing the bridges that are out closer to the inlet, I'll have, my redfish, trout, flounder, and a bunch more, a ton more. I couldn't even name them all. But if you go further back in the river where the water starts to get fresh, you can actually get striper and freshwater species as well, So it really depends on where you're at on what species you would get. But, bridges can be good to fish anywhere.
Well, what was really interesting too was the bigger fish, in particular like the tarpon that were roaming. It seemed like every time they were right in the shadow line, they were just kind of cruising that little shadow. And obviously the shadow line changes during the day, but in almost every case, they seem to be right there, and it spooks the heck out of you. Cause you're down there, your heart's already pumping a little bit because you're underneath the bridge and there's all kinds of stuff down there. And all of a sudden, it's weird when it's bright out and it's somewhat clear water down there for the most part. And you kind of see everything, and just like you see this just dark shadow. I mean, it goes all the way down to the water, and you kind of almost go into it, and all of a sudden it opens up again, and there's a big tarpon eye right there next to you. And it seemed like they were all right there in the shadow line, which I thought was interesting. What do you guys think? When you're fishing bridges, Justin, you targeting these shadow lines?
Well, I was going to piggyback on Austin, and you guys are starting to make mention about what species you're targeting, because the species that you want to go for, and the better you understand the behavior of those species, the better geared you're going to be to catch them. Redfish, black drum, and sheephead, they're big crustacean eaters when they're hanging around pilings and structure and bridges. So they're going to be pinpointed real tight to the pilings and any piece of structure, because obviously that's where the crustaceans are going to live. Tarpon are kind of like a mixed match. Like they're, like you said, they're cruising around, they're hanging in that shadow line for sure. I do remember most of the ones that I would sight fish down in the Keys are right in that shadow line, kind of suspended. Or same with barracudas. They were just kind of chilling there in the shadow line, waiting for an easy mullet to swim by. But what you fish for, you should better understand what the behavior of that species is. They're all going to be oriented to the structure in different ways. Not all fish are going to act the exact same way on that structure, is kind of what I'm saying. So yeah, for tarpon fishing, absolutely. Even in the daytime, when it's clear down there, you can sight fish them on the surface. And then, throughout the Atlantic coast or the Gulf Coast, if the water's a little bit dirtier, they're going to hang out in that shadow line, usually on the down current side, waiting in ambush for things to sweep past to them. But I'm thinking about in the winter months, the big black drum that hang out at the bridges there in Brevard County. Me and Tony, he's not on this call, but we've done that before in years past, where you find just wads, you find big schools of 50 or 100 plus fish hanging out on these bridges, and you constantly have to try to meander in between all the pilings of the bridge until you mark the school. Otherwise, it's all these fish congregated really tightly together, and we don't find them outside of the bridge. They're in between the pilings, in the shadow line sometimes if it's really sunny out, and you've got just a zone to be able to fish in. So if I were landlocked, absolutely, I would make sure that my bait is a combination of both being right next to structure, and if I can get it in a shady area, that's even better. Those are the two things I'd look to. If we're talking about bait positioning, that'd be kind of my starting point.
That's good. Let's talk about bait. We've talked a lot about where to find the fish. What do you guys think bait wise?
So I'll say in terms of bait, like Justin said, it's a very crustacean focused environment. Joe, I'm sure when you were down there, you didn't see too many small bait fish. Most of the predators there got big from eating a lot. So there's not a huge supply of bait fish down there. And when we start thinking about how we're going to work, our artificials or how we're going to put baits down there, unless you pin like a mullet to the bottom or pin a pilchard to the bottom or a pinfish, something like that, it's hard to, have a bait fish presentation. And a lot of times being in areas with really heavy current, unless you get it right behind that piling, it'll kill stuff pretty quickly. Same thing with, small shrimp, things like that, but you can drop down crab. Crab is, I think out of all the guys that I've been out with and spoke with, I don't typically use a whole lot of live bait, but a lot of the guys that I know that are really successful around bridges drop down crab. It's a pretty hardy bait, and drums seem to love it. I know fishing around bridges for tarpon, you can float crabs. We've seen that with some of the stuff we've done with Peter Miller, and bridges similar to where you were, Joe, just floating crabs, blue crabs, pass crabs, things like that. But if I was going to be using artificials, I would opt for something like a power prawn, just because when we think about how we need to swim a paddle tail to get action out of it, the power prawn is nice. And it's why I think Luke uses it so much around docks too, is because you can put it right next to a piling and you can work that piling for, several seconds just bouncing. You can work that one small spot and put a lot of action in an area without taking it away. With paddle tail, you're going to get one pass around that piling as you swim it, and then you have to recast, put it back into position. If you're next to that piling with the power prawn, you can bounce, bounce, bounce. Same thing when you put down a crab, it stays there. It's really hardy. That mullet or that pinfish is likely going to get killed by that current pretty quickly, unless it's right in the current break, in that eddy. But most of those, really large fish thrive on those high calorie crabs. We talk about what makes redfish grow biggest. We see redfish that feed on crustaceans to have a little bit larger bodies. The ones that feed on crabs, those are usually what the tournament guys go after, because they tend to put on a little bit more weight. So they favor crabs, I would say, near bridges. Just, I know you've done a lot of really big drum fishing near those bridges. Do you see that similar trend? Do you see more bait fish focus, or is it more of a crustacean pattern that you see there?
I'll agree that fishing with crab is the way to go for big reds, big sheephead, big black drum. You got to have a lot of patience to fish with crabs, and you need to have a lot of crabs. Because anywhere that I've soaked crab on bottom, if I put in the time and I make sure that my bait is fresh and I check it periodically, I'm going to pull out a big fish. But, the crab chunks can get picked apart by smaller critters down there. There are, depending on where you're at, like sergeant majors and pinfish and just, toaders, or what is it? Toadfish, right? Like oyster
toadfish, yeah.
Toadfish. Just there's all kinds of stuff down there that peck apart the inside of a crab carapace, and it drives me nuts. So, if I soak a crab, I'm going to do like a half crab or a whole crab and just take the legs off and go for broke. Like if I'm fishing a bridge, I know that there's monster fish around, so I'm going to use a monster bait, and I know I'm going to put in a good 6 hours for one big bite. But if I wasn't going to use crab, my second go-to is actually going to be a big fish chunk. So like a big mullet chunk, ladyfish chunk. Even if all I had was pinfish, live or dead, I'm okay using a finfish. But I know that, redfish, tarpon, other fish that might not be super keyed in on the crustaceans because the little guys are getting to it first. I'm not above soaking a big, fresh hunk of fish on bottom. You're going to have to weed through sharks. I think that's going to be an inevitable. If you're going to soak a big piece of mullet or a big finfish or bait fish, there's going to be chances that a big bonnet head or a black tip's going to come by and pick it up. But those are, I'd say, would be the two that I go to, or crab, like fresh live or half crab, chunk mullet. And then the power plant, I thought about how you present your lure. So let's say you don't want to deal with bait. Okay, let's say you do want to go out there with artificials and you want to lug the bucket down there with an aerator, and you still want to catch a couple fish and you've only got a couple of hours to do it. Definitely the power prime, and really any lure that you use, I would keep in mind that how you present your lure is going to be very different than how you present your bait, live or dead on bottom. So if you're going to use a power prawn or, a Slam Shady bomber on a 1/4 ounce or 1/2 ounce jig head, something a little bit heavier, definitely throw it up current, and you have to kind of, turn your handle a little bit faster and bring that lure with the same speed of the current. Present it as if the bait is on a conveyor belt in the areas that you think these fish are going to be.
Oh, I think we just lost them.
Uh-oh.
It was a great tip too.
I would agree with him though. Yeah, absolutely. I like Wyatt said, crustaceans, shrimp, and your crabs are going to definitely be the number one thing that you're going to see year round on your bridges. I don't know that they're fiddler crabs that you see on the bridges a lot. They might be, are they rock crabs? I'm not 100% what they're called, but that's one of the reasons why those sheep's head are hanging out around the bridge. And so that's one of my most common baits to use, but you definitely still could use an artificial crab to do that as well. as you guys have seen. I think Luke and Joe have done quite a few videos doing that. And it would be a little bit different with that, because then you would just be basically dropping that fiddler crab down on the side of the bridge that the current is not hitting, and just kind of making it look as natural as possible. You wouldn't want to be jerking it all around and stuff like you might would with an artificial, but for sheepshead, it's just make it look like that crab is falling down the side of that pylon. And yeah, so same thing though with the big crabs and stuff like that is normally what I'll use when I'm fishing bridges for big fish. I'm either going to use a cut crab, a piece of cut mullet, and for the most part, those crustaceans are what you're going to see until it gets into the fall time, or kind of like right now. We've already here in Jacksonville, we've already got some big bait showing up. So you got some bigger mullet coming in, and those can be a good thing to have sometimes fishing around the bridges too, floating, because that's normally the giveaway for like tarpon here. Normally you'll see those big schools of mullet coming in, and then the next thing you know, you got a bunch of tarpon rocketing on those mullet. But I'll also say, and you guys, I'm hoping you guys agree with me at least, bridges are a good place to go to look for what not to do when fishing. Would y'all agree?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I watched it. I mean, these guys, you should seen some of the hardware they had. I was like, what are you possibly fishing for? And they were going for little snapper and stuff, but it was just like, what in the world?
Yeah. So just for the obvious, you normally, if you're going to put a bottom rig out at a bridge, you want to go to the side of the bridge that the current is not hitting, because if you're casting your bait out into the current, odds are it's just going to go right into that bridge and likely going to get you hung up in that pylon. So it really depends on the currents in the area. There's definitely exceptions to that, but for the most part, for the bridges that I think most of us are talking about right now, that would be the case. And then store-bought rigs and stuff like that, you'll really see the difference between somebody that's using a store-bought rig and somebody that has learned how to make rigs themselves and make them look natural.
Yeah, when you see the pyramid sinker and the red beads and all that on top, I was like, no, don't use it.
Yeah, it's funny how the simplest rigs are actually the most effective ones. I mean, when we talk about targeting sheepshead, it's literally like Austin showed it time and time again. Fishing around structure like that, split shots, heavy split shots, and just a bare hook. You don't need any kind of fancy wire or swivels or, clasps or anything. Just split shots and those octopus hooks. When you're going after some of the larger drum, Carolina rigs, knocker rigs, those are all very simple to tie. And it's very, there's no crazy hardware there that's going to spook fish off. I mean, Joe, you saw it when you were there. You start using a lot of that flashy, wire that's really heavy. Deeks has showed it on the underwater courses. It's a really good way to scare fish off. I mean, they can see it very clearly. They're hanging around that bridge. They got time to analyze stuff. It's not like fish that are on the move on the flats or that are taking what they can get. They have time to analyze it because there's going to be a constant flow of food near that bridge. So you really need to be on point with your presentations. In fact, that's where I see fish get really picky, is around megastructure like that, because they have so many opportunities to feed. You need to really convince them that what you're giving them is not going to pose a danger. So very simple rigging for sure. You don't need any of those store-bought rigs, and just stick to the simple stuff. I would say that I don't really deviate from Carolina rigs when I'm fishing around bridges for bottom. And if I'm going to be using, any kind of artificials, I usually just go with a heavy jig head. But I'm always using heavier leader. I would say that if you are creating bottom rigs or you're going to be fishing with artificials, at minimum, you need to be using 30, 40 pound leader, because there's a very good chance that fish is going to take you around a piling. So tie on a little bit of a longer leader and make it a little bit heavier, because there's a really good chance you're going to end up with some abrasion. If you don't have something that can deal with that, you're going to be losing a ton of fish.
Yep, agreed. And Justin was kind of going this path, and we talked about it briefly, but I am an absolute believer in the power prawn. Wyatt, you got to see it. I mean, we were basically just vertical jigging the thing in 50 to 70 feet of water. And it was interesting too. Remember when I first started it, you guys were using cut bait, and power prawn was catching just as many fish as cut bait was. And then I put Dr. Juice on there, and it's like supercharged everything. So I think with those two combinations, that's what I would use. Cause like, I love those little like chase bait crabs and the different artificial crabs like sheepshead around some bridges, but the ones that we're talking about for the most part, they have so much current flow. Like those things aren't heavy enough. They're in the next, they're in the next city, by the time you try to get down to the bottom. So I'd love a power prawn on a heavier jig head if you were going artificial lures. And like Justin said, just slowly kind of popping that thing off the bottom, just a natural, pleasant little drift right into the conveyor belt. And that thing works like crazy.
Yeah, and you don't got to worry about sharks coming up and grabbing that. Like with the cut bait, for anybody that watched those podcasts, it was Shark City for me and Luke when we were dropping down those cut baits. I mean, I don't know if you had any issues with sharks until you started actually reeling in all of your fish.
Yeah.
I don't know if you actually had any hit that power prawn, but if you're going specifically after game fish, crustaceans are the move for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and going into that too, is if you're getting a lot of sharks and things like that, another method you could do, fish go all the way up the entire water column. It might be a different species of fish, but, Austin, I know you've seen me use the slip float around here with huge success. And you can put a heavy dropper weight on that and a little bit of leader, and you can actually target and find out where those fish are holding, move down a couple feet each time until you find them. And that'll alleviate a lot of those, if you are getting a lot of sharks or undesirable, fish, as well. And it's hard to pass up a juicy shrimp, dead drift right by those pylons. But again, you want to be right next to that pylon, just like bait naturally would be getting washed out. And those big predator fish can jump in the current real quick and grab it and then head back into that kind of safe harbor zone where they expend less energy.
Yep. And let's talk too about the different seasons. I mean, I think a lot of people think bridge fishing summer, the vacation. I mean, the Keys were just slam packed in all those bridges because everyone's on vacation here right before Labor Day, and bridges can be productive pretty much all year long, at least in the South. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I would completely agree. Like I said earlier, they're like an inshore reef that is always holding bait, and you pretty much can fish a bridge all year long and find fish, mainly due to the fact of you're not everywhere, but a lot of the times you'll be able to find a bridge that's closer to an inlet or a pass. And then also it's going to cover a wide range of depths. So, as the seasons change and those fish are moving through different depths, you also can do the same thing up on top of the bridge. Or if you're in a boat or however, and just something else I wanted to throw out there real quick is weather. Bridges are one of my favorite places to go when it is a rainy day and I got to go fishing. And I'll just go find a bridge that I can tuck up underneath, and I still can get my fishing in without getting soaking wet. But just wanted to put that one out there.
Unless it's lightning, you should probably not go out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they really are, year-round areas of fish. Because, example, in the winter, most of these bridges are concrete, wood, heavy, dense material. And, if you get a nice sunny day, that material's warming up. And even though, it goes to night, that stuff's still warm. And those fish will congregate around a lot of that stuff. And like what we said, it's a high current flow area. So in the summer, it's perfect. They get a lot of that DO2 and everything as well. So they're really set up perfectly.
Yeah, I'd agree. And you can just change your tactics. Each season is going to present different opportunities with different species. We talked about, sheepshead, they get really active in the wintertime around structure, especially near passes and inlets, just because they tend to I believe they actually spawn offshore, but you get a lot of species that are moving in and out of that pattern, in fall, early winter, and then late winter again when they return. And it's the same thing with drum and redfish. There's different seasons where you can focus your efforts on a specific species and tend to have, good luck. There's runs with everything. And even fishing around certain bridges, you can get Spanish mackerel that hang around those areas. There's just so many different species. There's always something running, or there's something that's thick there that time of year. And if, you do your research, it's different, depending on where you live. But there's always something that you can target with pretty good success at a bridge, regardless time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of to what you were just saying, you can pretty much catch those fish there year long. It's just learning how those fish act, just like Justin was saying, like the black drum, like to get right up in that structure. And it's cool to see that, he's not technically fishing. He has fished where I'm at, but he's not technically fishing where I'm at. He's fished other bridges and found the same thing. Wyatt has found the same thing. And so it's learning those species and then applying that. So like, for example, what Wyatt was just saying about sheep's head, when in the wintertime, they get really fired up, and you'll sometimes even see them coming up close to the tops of the pylon. So you might, rather than just dropping your bait straight down to the bottom and using a heavy weight, then you might, put a smaller weight on that's just enough to not let it go in the current, but you got some control over it, and you can slowly, naturally lower that down so that you can figure out where those sheep's head are holding at, just like what Richard was saying with the float rig and adjusting the depths. And yeah, so just really learning how those fish are throughout the seasons. It's still going to be really important with bridges, but that is one awesome thing about bridges, that you can fish them like all year.
Yep. And then the final tip is, if you have a very clear day, maybe it hadn't been raining in a while and it's just beautiful out and the sun's out and it's a slack tide, go dive a bridge. Obviously do it safe as possible. Have a dive buddy, but you would be surprised, one, how safe it is. I mean, you rarely hear people getting bit by sharks when they're out on the surf. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone getting, bit while they're under the bridge diving. I've seen them, and they stay away. I get more intimidated by the big Goliath grouper because they come right up in your face, and the sharks, they kind of bolt, which has been really interesting. But it is just so eye-opening what you can see. And I mean, Peter Deeks hammers that. That's why, his last course and now his next course, if you're an insider member, doggone, how awesome was that underwater bait forensics, where he took all the different baits, and including places like bridges and places with a lot of current, and showed exactly how the baits are looking, how they're being presented underwater. And the next one is how fish are feeding underwater, kind of like what John Skinner did with his underwater fluke videos on how fluke are actually attacking bucktail looser that are being presented to them in a variety of different ways. You can learn so much. And so Deeks is going down with his camera guy on, trying to find those clear days. And he's like, man, I am learning so much about how these fish actually position, where they are, like why they're in these certain 90-10 zones at certain times of the year. And then number two, how they track baits. I mean, like that underwater stuff Luke did with the trout, right? That was very eye-opening to see how they track it, and then how they're, almost kind of like sucking the thing down and like bending it in half and just annihilating it. So stay tuned for that, you insiders. We're gonna have a really, really cool course coming here with Captain Peter Deeks on underwater, basically kind of fish behavior and biology. Going to be really, really cool. And I see we have Justin back. What happened? Your internet go down?
Called round 2. Yeah, I got the blue screen, flagrant error. But I'm back.
He's back.
CPR, I'm here.
Yes.
Brought it back.
Well, we're about to close it up. So any final thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, I think if you want to go out and fish a bridge and you want to be prepared, but not bring a giant beach cart out there with everything, ask yourself this question: am I going to be dedicated to using bait, or am I going to fish artificials and make it a quick, 2-hour trip? If you're going to bring bait, I say all you really need is 2 rods, a backpack full of a couple different terminal tackle for different weights and leaders and hooks, and then a bucket of bait, fresh, live or dead. Doesn't really matter, as long as it's the bait that's appropriate for the area that you're fishing and the fish that you're trying to catch. And that would be pretty minimalist. One rod can be used to even catch bait, to bring like a high-low rig or a dropper rig with 2 little hooks and pieces of shrimp and catch whatever is local there to the bridge. And then one big old honking setup, like get yourself anything from a 7 to 8 foot rod, heavy. I got these all over. Like, this is my tarpon setup, but this is exactly what I would use at a bridge. Anything between 7 and 8 foot, a heavy power, like 15 to 30 pound, and your leader setup. Don't be shy on your leader, because when you do get that bite, you don't know what it's going to be exactly, and you don't know how big it's going to be. And if you're using a big piece of cut bait or crab, or even like a big pinfish on bottom, if something's going to come over and eat it, they're going to come over and eat it and hammer it. So don't be shy with taking out 50, 60, or even 80-pound leaders sometimes if you plan on going for a big bridge monster, because they're there and they're not going to be leader shy if they're hungry. So that's my recommendation. I'm very much a, go big, go home kind of person.
Can we get a simplicity specialist?
Simplicity specialist. God, I need to like grow up my hair like Fabio. It'd make it that much better.
That's it. Simplicity in specialist. Go simple. Keep it simple. You don't have to make country. What do we say? Country mile long cast was Courtney's term. Just Luke says it over and over again. Maximize the structure. You will maximize your strikes. And unless you know that there's some structure out there because maybe you have been diving it or you've gotten snagged multiple times and you're 100% sure there's some rock piles or something out there, stick close. And then also you can learn a lot from these videos. I don't know if you saw that one video where that dude, maybe we'll try to find it. It's out there somewhere, but he actually on a perfectly gin clear day in Sebastian Inlet, just snorkeled the whole thing. And it was like, wow, with his GoPro. And another guy did the Boca Grande, that little phosphate bridge. It's been down there forever. A lot of the Goliath grouper are caught. And once again, 90-10s, and they're literally all 100% right next to the structure. They weren't out meandering around. They were all right there next to the pilings.
And there's so many fish, so many more than you realize, guys.
Oh, yeah.
You don't see hundreds of snook and grouper and all kinds of stuff. It's really cool.
Yep. And then the final thing is come join us in the Insider Club. We celebrated a 25th anniversary, 25,000 members. It is now on its 5th anniversary, which is pretty cool. Got some members who have now hit their 5-year mark, and if you're listening, thank you guys so much. It is so cool. We're really stoked to get some live events going again. I know with all this COVID talk, it's been a little bit tougher to try to organize stuff but it's going to happen. I mean, at some point, things will get much better. And we've already got, if you're an insider, be looking for an email very soon, if not already, with some choice of some dates for a big event that we are going to have for all of you. And I hope you'll be able to make that. And then, guys like Wyatt out in Texas. We're looking for some new coaches in Carolinas. If you guys know of any, I know Richard's going to start getting out there in both North Florida and Georgia, and even some South Kakalaki. And we're just going to continue to keep spreading the knowledge far and wide. We're listening to you and be in the community as much as possible. That's where we're getting a lot of our ideas in terms of, figuring out what people are interested in, what kind of specific topics do you want to see? Where do you want us to fish? That's something that we all enjoy doing. Luke and I are going to Mississippi in a few weeks, a place we haven't done that many fishing reports to kind of get some new stuff there. So we'd love to hear from you. Anything you guys have, posted in the Insider community. It's the private platform we built for our members with all the smart fishing tides is there. All the fishing reports, all of our Insider reports. That's where we go fish new spots every week and show you everything, including the spot and where the fish were, where the fish weren't. We have the spot dissections and a whole just awesome lineup of other cool things. And then, of course, the tackle. Really big news, Justin. It happened today. We got the owner inline hooks for the Moonwalker, the topwater lure. So just in time here for this late summer, early fall, big topwater bite, which is always one of the cool times to throw a topwater lure. And this will be the last round of the Moonwalker. That's our proprietary topwater lure with those really nice single inline hooks before we get the final version. That's based on your feedback as insiders. So we're creating lures for insider members based on your feedback, and have a couple other things in the pipeline as well, including a rod. And the next will be some proprietary reels for our members as well. But we're definitely going to hammer home this topwater, nail that. We've been going back and forth on the rods for the longest time, and that'll be the end of the year. But this Moonwalker, I'm pumped about that. So we got nice owner single inline hooks, save you guys some time and money. And oh yeah, there's one right there. Whoop, whoop. It's the old Moonwalker. Yeah, I'm pumped. I'm pumped about that. I'm pumped to pumped to see who wins the big championship belt as well. Who's winning? It's like 30 spots or something.
31 from, I believe it's Matthew Stevens, I want to say.
That's it.
Yeah. Good job, Matthew.
That's our current leader, but there's still time to go.
Oh yeah, that's the beauty of it is someone can win the very last day. And we're giving away these free slam stickers, really awesome waterproof stickers for our members who are catching slams this month. And this is the belt. If you guys have missed it, we're always trying to have some fun. And that is the Redfish Championship belt that one lucky winner will be taking home, probably sporting it around the office and house. I mean, I imagine just coming out of the shower with this thing, just like champion. Man, my wife, she would just absolutely love it. And I'm kidding. She probably hate it.
Cooking that chicken parm is so much better wearing that belt around the house. Yeah. All bragging rights. All bragging rights.
I love it. But yeah, come join us there if you haven't already. It's the only online fishing club, guarantees your success or you do not pay. And really two big goals is save money on the tackle, because we're all buying tackle, regardless of how much we say simplicity. We also like buying tackle. We like trying stuff. So we get it. So we want to help you save money there. Buy 20% off or more on everything in our store at fishstrong.com. But two, and probably even more importantly, is showing you what not to buy, right? How to avoid the mistakes. So we go out there with our own hard-earned money and try out all of this tackle, all the stuff that you see us do reviews on. Every week, we're buying with our own hard-earned money, and we're reporting on what we like about it, what we don't like about it, et cetera, without any sponsors telling us what to say, without any manufacturer saying, Neil, you got to say this, or here's a script. We tear that stuff up. We have no sponsors. We've been offered sponsors. We reject them all because we want to be unbiased and tell you guys exactly what to buy, what not to buy. So number one is saving money. Number two is saving time by putting you in the 90-10 zone. So if that sounds like something you like and you like to be around positive, awesome people who like to share and help you out, then come join us. And that's all at saltstrong.com. You'll see a little button to join the club and a little video about everything that you get as a member. So guys, anything else before we close it out on this Bridge Fishing Tactics podcast with most of us here the full time, minus Justin? Wyatt, maybe you should give him your little hand. Justin leaves.
What time is it? It's time to drop off the call.
This has been good, guys. Finally, we will have this episode, including some of the things we talked about. We'll even put, if Courtney, if you're listening, make sure to put a link to the video we did where we actually went and fished. I believe, no, it wasn't this bridge. It was the bridge next to it where we fished it by boat and did the same thing. We anchored up current and just let our chunks of bait and slam shady just go right there under, and every strike was right underneath the bridge where the pilings were. So we have some of that footage as well. And of course, if you're an insider member, you get to see a little bit more on exactly where we were and have some really cool tactics that we don't share with the public. So once again, join us at saltstrong.com. Otherwise, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Follow us everywhere on social media. And of course, if you're listening on the podcast, please give us a thumbs up in terms of the review, the 5-star review, depending on what platform you're on. It helps us out big time. It helps us to be found. We like to be found. It helps us get more listeners, helps this whole community grow, helps us get bigger discounts, better deals for you guys. Everybody wins. So that's it. We will talk to you guys in the next episode. We out. Peace.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul. It was passed down to me from the days of old. Find us on the water if there was a way. It's been said my papa, he wrote the book on catching big reds and 20-pound snook. I wish I knew all the things he knew today. For he's the reason why we are this way. And he put fishing in her soul.